The future belongs to service providers who innovate without limits. That's why the fastest growing service providers are choosing the NetSapiens platform. Visit netsapiens.com.
Hey everybody, it's Doug Green and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News, and I'm very pleased to have with me today Dan Rochon, who's an author. Teach to Sell. Dan, thank you for talking to us today.
My pleasure, Doug. Hey.
So actually, let's just jump right into it. Let's find out a little bit about the book and about yourself and what we're doing here today. So first of all, what is Teach to Sell?
Teach to Sell, Doug, is about understanding how to ethically influence. And we can, dive into that deeply, but that's really just a straight up, like, how can you ethically influence another human being?
And the subtitle is Why Top Salespeople Never Sell and What They Do Instead. Yes. So I take it that you have a theory or a view that you're not really maybe selling, you're sort of influencing. Is that really where we're going with this?
I want you to think about, whether if you're in technology or, a service provider, whatever the case may be, that, things have changed so fast, but humans, it's we want trust. And the biggest mistake that we have is in gaining trust is thinking that it's about convincing, it's about pushing. But the reality of it is, it's not about that at all. It's about deeply understanding who you're speaking with. And I, in the book, go through some tools on how to be able to do that, and then guiding them. And when you're able to guide them, you're able to then be able to really be able to gain the trust. And then when you gain the trust, then you're able to ethically influence.
Dan, this is very interesting. We were just talking about, who our audience is. Yeah. And one of the things that our MSP people here have been hearing for maybe 5 or 6 years or more is be the trusted advisor, right? So the idea has been to move from, selling stuff and boxes and so on to, in a sense, being not necessarily consultative, but to provide consultation with action.
It is. And to be able to do that, you have to first understand what is it that your customer, what is it that their pain is? What is their problem? Okay. And to do that, I go through in the book, Teach to Sell, I go through something I call the CPI communication model, which is consistent, predictable income communication model, which is to gain rapport first. And that's a connection of energy. And then ask deep diving, adept questions, and then actively listening. Okay. And so when you're intending to influence, you have to first be connected energetically with the other person, whether that be a service provider, whether that be your boss, whether if you're building a company, you want to sell it, whatever the case may be, whoever you're communicating with, let's connect energetically. Then let me really find out what is your need. And then as I discover what your need is and I pay attention to your energy, now I'm able to then guide you. And to do so, it's through leadership. And my definition of leadership in the book is to teach somebody else how to get what to understand how to think so that they can get what they want. All right. And so if you're looking at how do you ethically influence, it's really about understanding their goals rather than pushing your product or your service.
So how did you get here? In other words, how did you arrive at these conclusions? How did you get, what's your journey like?
My first business was shut down. It was a horrific shutdown. The principal of my first grade class did not like the idea that I was selling bubblegum balls to my colleagues, to my fellow students. And so I've been in sales my entire life. It wasn't until maybe 20 years or so. So I had about maybe call it 20 years of experience. And then 20 years of study. And it was like, I learned it backwards. And so meaning like, I just did like trial by fire and just would understand how to be able to influence. But then when I started to study it and I put on neuro-linguistic programming, hypnotic techniques, psychology, and really understanding the neuroscience, then I discovered that what I had learned like sort of in the field over 20 years, there's evidence and there's a pathway and there's a model ABC. And when you follow ABC, you're going to get a predictable result. And that's what the book Teach to Sell discovers or highlights for the reader.
What does your ABC stand for? Since you said ABC.
that was just a like a metaphor for, for taking a step. So so it's 1, 2, 3. You follow first step, second step, third step, and you're going to have a predictable result, right? So if you want to be able to get your kid to clean their room, if you want to be able to build a technology business and sell it, if you want to be able to influence a community, to influence anybody, there is a model, there is a pathway that you can follow that is going to allow for you to predictably create the outcome that you desire, as long as it's the outcome that that person also desires that you're leading, and understanding how to be able to align the two.
It's always sounds and forgive me for putting it this way, but Dan, you'll know what I mean. At seminars, podcasts like this, all sorts of events and so on, you go and you hear it and it always sounds so easy, but it's really, really hard. A person gets a job as a salesperson and they get a territory and they get this, that, and the other. And they're actually now contacting clients, potential clients. It sounded easy, but it's really hard. So how do you've actually done this the hard way. How do you get this conversation going? I mean, how do you enact all this?
Well, I mean, you have to understand first you have to have the knowledge base, right? So obviously everybody that we're talking to has a different expertise, and expertise is only powerful when the buyer can understand it, or the person who you're influencing can understand it, right? So if you know everything, but you can't make the buyer feel safe, you lose. Okay. So it goes back into the energy more than the knowledge, particularly in the technical field, because in the technical field, it's about data. It's about, widgets, and in that human connection is really, I believe, where the biggest gap is for, for somebody in the technology world. And it's almost like we forgot to listen, right? So now with artificial intelligence shaping who we meet, what we notice, what gets our attention, it's really, these days it's getting harder to really tell the difference between something that's polished and the real thing. AI can be perfect, but it can't care. It can't cross that gap where trust lives. And technology, it can give us more information than ever before, but only human beings can give us trust.
And all these prepared questions about AI and selling, but maybe it's just easier to just ask you it this way. So it sounds like the first thing is, are you sort of telling us maybe that we can use AI? I'm trying to sell you that microphone. Okay. So is my first step to use AI just to find out about Dan? Just find out what he does and figure out, like what you said about pain point. Like, in other words, what does this guy need? Is that what's happening?
Well, let's look at it like this. So absolutely, Doug. So let's look at it like this. So we're going to sell this microphone.
Right.
For me to sell this microphone, the first thing I have to do is ask you a question. If you ever saw Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort says, "Sell me this pen," right? And what was it about selling me this pen? It was all the salespeople say, "Yeah, it's a great pen," whatever. But really, it's about understanding. Well, Doug, are you signing autographs? Are you writing a memoir? What is it that you need the pen for? So that's the first step, selling the microphone, and then identifying the pain. And then when you identify the pain, it's going to be internal, like the way it makes you feel, and it's going to be external. Okay. So maybe I figure out that, Doug, like you've been doing this for, 1,000 years that you've been doing your craft, and you haven't had the right microphone the entire 1,000 years. And there's an external thing is that your voice doesn't sound as great as it could be.
Right.
That's an external thing. And then what does that make you internally feel as a pain? It makes you internally feel like, well, I'm not as good as I could be, and I feel bad about that.
Right.
Then what's their desire? Well, my desire is I want to be able to impact as many people's lives as possible through my voice, through my audience, through my education, through my knowledge. And that would be a desire. And so then you have the internal desire, the external desire, and then in between there would be the product or service that you're selling. Okay. So it's what's the pain, internal, external, what's the desire, internal and external. And then the gap, the bridge between that pain and that desire is the product or the service that you're selling.
Now, I'm starting to hear, and I'm not surprised at this point, I'm starting to hear from some sales managers, from people that lead teams of marketing and so on, of kind of the misuse or misapplication of AI, of people using AI and then running off to social media and sort of, sharing the wealth of information that actually AI got. And somehow it misses the mark, let's just say. In other words, this is like one of the ways I'm starting to hear AI is being kind of not used well.
Well, I would agree with that because it actually breaks the trust. So if you can imagine that if you're using AI to be able to put a public image on, I'll give you an example, Doug. So and AI is actually sort of messing up a little bit of the human connection. I had a client a week ago that I sent a really well thought out video and explaining the product, explaining the service. And I sent that video out to her, and her response was she's out of country. She's in Korea. I'm in Northern Virginia. And so there's a 13-hour time gap. So, the communication is not, like in real time, except for, at the early morning and the evening. And she responded to me, Dan, I thought that was an AI video that you put together before I watched the entire thing. Okay. Now, if it would have been an AI video, there's no way I would have gained trust with her. Mm-hmm. But because I'm using my own voice, and did I use AI to research some of the data? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So I use it as a tool, but only humans can connect. Only humans can trust. AI will never be able to trust to be able to make that connection.
So let's go back to the microphone because I'm fascinated. My first step is, okay, I find out that Dan writes books. I find out that he does podcasts like we're doing today. And I find out that, he's using, I'll just pick on our friends here, the laptop industry. He's using the microphone that's built into the machine. So it's great content, but it sounds like he's in a box.
Sure. Yeah. Or echo chamber or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And now let's suppose for argument's sake, AI allows me to learn all that very quickly. You're saying I still need to approach Dan as a person and say, hey, I see that maybe you're using a regular I've got a really great microphone. It will make you look better. I'm just sort of making this up. It'll be a better look in the podcasts that you do or something like that.
I would change that just slightly, Doug, where I wouldn't approach the consumer with, right, I see you have this problem. Instead, I would ask the question, and I would discover what the problem is through asking adept questions.
Okay. So don't walk in the door and just say, I know what your problem is.
No, even if you do know what their problem is, it's about understanding. It's about leading somebody how to think so that they can get what they want. You're able to influence through asking questions, right? And it's just not those surface level questions like, how's your sound? It's not great. Okay. Well, tell me more about that. Like if you are doing a professional product and your sound's not great, how does that impact you as a figurehead or you as a spokesperson? Right. And then now you're identifying really like ultimately me not having a better microphone or using the factory set microphone for my computer. I, as the consumer, then it's like, oh goodness, Doug's asking me these questions. He's not telling me at all. He's guiding me for me to discover, be like, you know what, Doug, I think I need a new microphone. And then that's my decision rather than you saying, hey, Dan, you need your voice sucks.
So I noticed in all that, you're not even yet talking about the actual product that you're selling.
You're talking about the problem.
So you start with the person or the company and you try to essentially discover from them what their issues are.
Yes. And remember, the product of the service is the bridge. That's what sits that's what's in between. Okay. And so if you think about this is why do you start with the pain and then go to the desire? If a lion came in your window right now, how fast would you run out of that room? Like that.
Right.
If there was a diamond field 10 miles from here, would you be able to sprint at the same rate that the lion came in, like you're sprinting out of that room? Would you be able to sprint for 10 miles? Probably not. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so there's one is like, you're not going to move towards pleasure as quickly as you're going to move away from pain. Okay. So you ask about like, when do you talk about the product or service? It's after you identify what is the pain, what is the problem, then where do they want to go? The last thing that you do is now I talk about the microphone. So Doug, if you want to go from sounding not great and feeling not great about the way that you're presenting yourselves, but instead you want to be able to impact more of an audience and you want to be able to help them solve their problem. The solution for you, Doug, would be this microphone.
But I think that it's fair to say that there's still the syndrome of, I don't even know what it's called. The salesman makes a sale. He's very grateful to make the sale. And then he's almost scared to ever revisit it. And where I'm coming up with this is, in many of our sectors now, where you used to sell equipment, now you're selling subscriptions.
Sure.
Those subscriptions have to be annually renewed. And we know that a lot of partners are struggling with even really wanting to dive into it, let alone actually approaching the customer to re-up all that stuff.
Well, it all goes back to, if your product or service is changing somebody's life for the better, right, then, I mean, for me, you should have confidence that you should be able to have that conversation relatively easily. The only thing that would cause you hesitation of having that conversation would be if you're not comfortable and confident in your own product or service. Okay. And if that's the case, then my recommendation would be, let's take a look at that first. Right. Because there should be really, now if it's just a fear of sales, it's just a fear of like making the ask, that's a whole different opportunity. That's what Teach Yourself can help you with. Okay. So the first piece is if you're not proud of your product and service, it's not changing people's lives. Okay. Let's take a look at that. Okay. Yet, if it's just you're afraid to make a request or you're afraid to make a sale, understand what sales is. Sales is not begging. Sales is influencing and helping people. Sales is educating. That is teach to sell. Teach to sell is being able to demonstrate to you, Doug, that I'm helping you, that I am guiding you, that I am being able to be that resource. Real quick, think back to your schooling days. And if you listen to this, if you can close your eyes and think back to your favorite teacher, your favorite coach, your favorite guide. Hear their voice, see their face, feel the way you felt when they believed in you. Now imagine that person came into the room today and gave you some coaching, gave you some guidance, gave you a suggestion. Would you follow that person? Most people, when I've asked that question, I've never had a person say no to that.
Right.
That's because that person, however many years ago, developed trust with you that has lasted a lifetime. So that's an example that we really understand that the influence, it's about helping. Because that teacher, that coach, that guy, maybe they taught you algebra, maybe they taught you how to run a football drills or whatever the case may be, or cheerleading. But really what they helped you with was probably something in your life that was more meaningful. Challenge with friends or being judged or a first boyfriend or girlfriend or your family, whatever the case may be. They cared for you. Okay. So going back to answer your question, Doug, it's about like, what would I say to somebody that is afraid to make an outreach to somebody that's already a current client? Well, guess what? It's a whole lot easier to maintain a client than to get a new client. Okay. And so if you're afraid to have that conversation, understand that you're there as the guide. And that could be very, very powerful when you follow the recipe, the same way as that teacher, that coach, or that guide, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago was able to influence you, to impact you even to today.
Dan, I really want to thank you for joining me today. There's so much to talk about. I hope we get to do this soon again and sort of maybe dive into some individual topics one by one. But for now, tell us about the book again, Teach to Sell. Where can we get it?
Teach to Sell, Why Top Salespeople Never Sell and What They Do Instead. And if you're looking to be able to, if you're overwhelmed right now, if you're skeptical, if you're tired of pitching, then Teach to Sell will help you to understand how to guide others to make the right decision instead of trying to sell them, how you can do that. That's going to develop more trust, better conversations, shorter sales cycles, more consistent revenue. You can go to www.teachtosellbook.com. That's teachtosellbook.com, or you get on any retailer, Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, Books A Million, wherever you get your books.
Dan, thank you very much indeed for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Doug.
Innovate without limits, scale without compromise, and never pay per seat again. Discover why providers choose netsapiens.com.